Great. Well, hello, everybody. As you can see, we have so many exciting things planned for you today. One quick note of housekeeping, you are all on mute right now. And as you have seen in previous presentations, we ask that you keep yourself on mute. And if you have any questions for our wonderful presenter, you can put them through via the chat and he will see them that way. All right, onward. So thank you so much for joining us for the YSS Luncheon. My name is Katie Kiekefer, and I am proud to be the past chair of the Youth Services section. YSS advocates for professional empowerment, collaboration, and innovative, inclusive, and intentional service. YSS provides a forum and resources for people in Wisconsin libraries who share a commitment to serving children and young adults, their parents, caregivers, and teachers. YSS is a vital and dynamic group, and we are always welcoming new members. If you're wanting more YSS in your life, you're in luck. Tomorrow, Thursday, November 12th, from 2:30 to 4 p.m., we are hosting a virtual regional meetup. And this is going to be a fantastic event. We have tours of Monona Public Library and also Prairie du Chien Memorial Library. If you're wanting more information, you can check out the YSS blog, and you can also find the Zoom link there. We'll also be holding our annual membership meeting at the end of tomorrow's virtual meetup. If you've been to the in-person WLA conference before and have attended our annual membership meeting, it'll be the same kind of format. We're just doing it at the end of this virtual meetup tomorrow. Speaking of the YSS blog, I also invite you to check out that blog for amazing, relevant news, events, and resources for library staff serving youth. Finally, I want to encourage all of our YSS members to check their emails for their link to this year's WLA ballot. YSS is holding elections this year, and we have some phenomenal people running. So we want to encourage everyone to be sure to cast your vote. And as a reminder, you need to be a current member of WLA to vote. So renew your membership today, get all of those great benefits of being a WLA member, and also make your voice heard. All right, now it's time to turn the mic over to Catherine Schufts. She is our fearless leader, chair of the YSS section, and she is also chair-elect for the Children's Book Award Committee. She's doing a lot, she's doing it all, and she is an all-around library rock star. Catherine, on to you. Catherine, can you hear us? Are you there?
I'm there. My thing muted. I totally did my whole intro and everything. All right, I'm here now, guys, and unmuted, so even better. All right, sorry about that, everyone, and thank you so much, Katie. As Katie mentioned, I am Catherine Schufts, and I am the current YSS chair. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're so thrilled to have the chance to connect with everyone, even though it happens to be in a virtual sense, because 2020, you know. Before I announce this year's winners and notable honorees, as well as our guest speaker, Geoff, I wanted to give a shout out to the YSS Luncheon sponsor, Penworthy. Penworthy pre-bound books are known as the most durable books in the industry due to their laminated covers that easily wipe clean and their reinforced binding. They offer new product monthly with no back orders, free shipping, and free cataloging and processing, so that's pretty handy. And in addition to amazing assortment of pre-bound books for patrons of all ages, they also carry Steam to Go kits, which is a great way to provide an easy, fun way to bring hands-on learning into the library. All right, and now, it is my great honor to share this year's Children's Book Award winners. The Children's Book Award Committee of the Wisconsin Library Association's Youth Services section annually selects outstanding books for youth by Wisconsin-connected authors and illustrators. The committee evaluates and selects winners for the Elizabeth Burr Warzella Award for the most distinguished work in children's and young adult literature written and or illustrated by a Wisconsin book creator, up to 10 outstanding books of the year, and a notable Wisconsin author of the year. This year's notable books of the year are Birds of a Feather, Bowerbirds and Me, written and illustrated by Susan L. Roth. The Disaster Days, written by Rebecca Behrens. The Happy Book and Other Feelings, written and illustrated by Andy Rash. Home in the Woods, written and illustrated by Eliza Wheeler. I Am Farmer, Growing an Environmental Movement in Cameroon, written by Baptiste Miranda Paul. Nina Soni, Former Best Friend, written by Kashmir Sheet. Reading Beauty, written by Deborah Underwood. Snail and Worm All Day, written and illustrated by Tina Kugler. Sport, Shipdog of the Great Lakes, written by Pamela Cameron and illustrated by Renee Grafe. And Viral, The Fight Against AIDS in America, written by Ann Bossum. So these are all, we had so many fantastic books. I definitely recommend you guys check these out, and also the books of our next two honorees. So next, I would like to announce this year's notable Wisconsin author recipient, Kashmir Sheet. Kashmir's writing highlights Indian culture, immigrant stories, social justice issues, and the power of self-discovery. So rather than me keep talking, I'm going to show a video from Kashmir herself. So just one moment as I pull that up.
Hello, my name is Kashmir Shet, and I'm very happy to be here with you, virtually of course. I'm humbled and honored to receive the 2020 Notable Children's Author Illustration Award from the Wisconsin Library Association. It is truly a great pleasure to be in company of very many distinguished past award winners. I wish I could be with you to talk to you about my own experience with libraries and librarians. Let me tell you that when I was young, growing up in India, I was surrounded by lots of stories. India is a storytelling culture, and I grew up listening to the stories from my grandparents, my parents, and neighbors and teachers. Books were there, but not as many as maybe I would have liked. When I was about 10, I would longingly look at my father's stack of books that he brought from the British Council libraries. I was a little envious because those books looked like it had so much in it that I wanted to read, but they were not accessible to me because I'm sure the subject matter wasn't right. They were mostly biography and autobiographies. But more than that, I could not read English that well at that time. So I felt that I was missing out on something. And my father realized that. And at that time, he was president of our building complex. And he and some other volunteers decided to start a very small library in our building. It was basically 2 or 3 wooden cupboards set up between 3rd and 4th floor of our building, which had a huge landing. And the books were brought or donated, cataloged. And every Sunday, a volunteer would come with a folding table and chair and sit down, and you could check out 2 books per person. So we had 4 people in my family, so I could check out 8 books because they gave me permission to check out books for them too. I read historical fiction that was set back in the time of Buddha to the, India's independence struggle. I also read a lot of poetry and any book that I could get my hands on. At that time, I didn't know that someday I would be a writer. Fast forward 25 years later. In Madison, I was expecting my first child. My neighbor gave me a book, a picture book, written by Eric Carley, The Very Hungry Caterpillar. I was fascinated by the pictures and the text. I read it before my daughter was born, and then later on, we read so many times that book. My second daughter was born, and reading was always a big part in our family. Then my two daughters became independent reader. They went to school and brought books back home that their teachers and librarians has suggested. And I enjoyed those books just as much as they did. We read it together so we could discuss them and think about more books like that we could, read. Of course, I had no idea how to guide them, but the librarians and teachers guided them. And for next 10 years, I read those books. I had no idea at that time that I wanted to be a writer. But as I got to that point, after 10 years or so, I started thinking about my own journey, an immigrant's journey from one country to another. I'd come here at the age of 17 to go to college. I'd studied microbiology. I had no idea how to write a story. But again, I went to the library, and I also went to Cooperative Children's Book Center. And everyone there were encouraging, and I was able to check out books. And I checked out books from local libraries about writing and the writing process. And that gave me some idea as to how to construct a story. And my first book, Blue Jasmine, was born. Of course, I wrote and rewrote and revised and re-revised many times before it was published. I also worked on picture books and other novels. Right now, my current project is writing about Nina Soni. She is a second-generation Indian immigrant, and it is a chapter book series. And as you can imagine, it's taken from my two daughters' experience growing up in Madison. Libraries and librarians have played a vital role in my life and my children's life. I know when you touch a child, you make a big difference for the rest of their lives. In this case, not only you've made difference in their lives, but in my life. I don't think I would be here talking to you if I didn't read with my children the books that so many librarians and teachers had suggested. Thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference. Goodbye.
Hey, I'm even unmuted right away, so that's pretty exciting. So, next up, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's luncheon, Geoff Herbach. Geoff's book, Cracking the Bell, is the winner of this year's Elizabeth Burr-Warzala Award and tackles the issue of traumatic brain injuries in school sports, including the tough choices that many young athletes and their families must make about their health, their futures, and the sports that they love. To say that it's an honor to have him join us for our very first virtual YSS Luncheon would be an understatement. Geoff will be taking questions at the end of the luncheon, so if you have something that you want to know or something you want to share, please do put it in the chat box, and if he doesn't see it, I'll make sure he does. But enough of hearing me talk. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me in welcoming Geoff Herbach.
All right. I think I can be heard. Well, I'm just so happy to be here. I live in Minnesota now, and it's still right across the river from Wisconsin, but it feels somehow very separate. And so to get this award is a huge deal. When I grew up in Platteville, in the southwest corner of the state, and my mother was an English teacher at the high school there, and she always told me when I was growing up that she didn't grow up around books, and it was the library was her second home wherever she moved. She moved a lot as a kid, and she always had a librarian who fed a book to her. And so when came around, I was lucky enough to have books everywhere around me. But that also didn't stop her from taking me to the library. And I don't know if any of you can appreciate this, but we would go in the middle of the summer, and it was that like thick Midwestern heat. I'd be just sweating bullets as we'd bike across town, and we'd bike across Platteville and go to the public library, and opening the door and having that just beautiful chilled library air hit me was amazing. And then I'd spend hours in the afternoons reading mostly sports biographies at the time, and that eventually turned into fantasy novels, which I stopped eventually when I hit high school, and read books like Chocolate War and A Separate Peace, and then found Vonnegut, which changed my life. But it was always, a librarian in Platteville handing me these books from my mother, who had, essentially she was the child of librarian, because her whole worldview was informed by librarians. So to have this award from Wisconsin is awesome. I'm a writer because of the books that surrounded me. I'm gonna just tell a little story. Starting in 5th grade, I wanted to be a writer. I was about 5% certain I would be a writer. I was 95% sure I would play professional football, which made no sense because in 5th grade I did not play sports. I watched them on TV and thought, yeah, I think I can do that. I did start playing sports later, and I'm going to kind of get into that and how stories and sports came together. I wrote a story in 5th grade about these ants, these extreme sports ants who made out of popsicle sticks that shot out of Smith Park in Platteville down to the grocery store where they stole bratwurst. And then flew back and high-fived, and that was the whole story. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. What an incredible story. And I, pictured the grand buildings at the UW campus in Madison, with students reading the story about ant stealing bratwurst with tears flowing in their eyes because they were so moved by the magnificent party at the end when they had their cookout. And I started playing sports in 7th grade. In 11th grade, oddly, I was still about 95% certain that I would be a professional football player. And for any of you who have met me in person before, you can maybe even see it now. That was not a reasonable dream. I was deluded. But I was a starting running back at Platteville High School in the late 80s, and I still thought, I like writing. I read all the time. Vonnegut was like my breakfast cereal. But I still thought I'd play professional football until this kid from Dodgeville. I swear he had like a 1980s mustache, a big fluffy mustache, and he had giant biceps. He hit me so hard during a game, I thought I would die. And it really, as I lay there on the field and the guy kind of turned orange and yellow, I really thought, if this high school kid can hit me so hard, I think I'm gonna die. What would an actual professional football player do to your body? Literally me. That's a story. That was a catalyzing event. That was when I knew I want to be a writer. I want to play professional football. So I went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I wrote all the time, and I was very much a UW-Madison kind of guy. I only wore black when I got to Madison, and I tried to grow my hair out long, and I tried to look sad, and I walked with a stoop because I was very thoughtful, and I thought my thoughts were heavy. Wore combat boots, and I wrote, I wrote all the time, and I was an English major, and I lived in a nest essentially of English majors and comp lit majors. I wrote, and I remember going to my dad at one point, I think midway through my junior year, and my dad had this very deep voice, and he said, "So, son, what do you want to do with your life?" Uh, and I said, "Well, Dad, I think I want to be a writer." And he made this kind of like, boom. I said, Dad, are you okay? And he said, "Do you know my friend Andy?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Andy is a writer and nobody wants to read his work, and he's so depressed because he can't publish anything that he pulls up to a stoplight and he stops. And when the light turns green, he just stays sitting there. And the police have to come and remove him from the intersection." And I said, "Because he wants to be a writer, he gets removed by the police from the intersection." And my dad just said, "Yes." And then I think he made up a person completely. He said, "You know my friend Milos?" I said, "No." My dad had moved at that point. He was a professor at UW Platteville, and he had moved up to Duluth. Um, and he said, "Yeah, my friend Milos is he wants to be a writer, and he's actually had some success. He's published, but he's still writers are just depressed. They're depressed people." And he drove out of Duluth last summer, and he took a right, and he drove into Canada, and he hasn't come back. I said, "So you're saying I'm going to disappear into Canada if I want to be a writer?" And my dad sort of looked around nervously and then said, "Yes, it could happen." Um, well, all I did was read. All I did was hang out at Helen C. White Library in Madison. All I wanted to do was be a writer. And if that was possible, and my dad kind of scared me because I didn't want to go to Canada, I didn't know what to do. So I dropped out. And I took a job, some of you may know it, at Bernie's Rock Shop in Madison. Actually, to this day, it's probably the best job I've ever had. I loved it. I made $3.25 an hour selling rocks, very pretty rocks. Uh, um, and my parents started getting on me again, like, "Well, what are you going to do?" I mean, at one point, my mother, the English teacher, said, "Well, you said you wanted to be a writer. Maybe you should be a journalist." So after I graduated, I went back to school and graduated. I became a journalist, and I went to Washington, D.C., and I wrote for a magazine called the National Journal. I wrote stories about the environment, and I hated them. I was bored. There was this guy though named Steve who sat next to me at the publication. It was Greenwire at the National Journal, and Steve wrote this thing called the Daily Fun Day, and essentially all it was a joke. He just had made some sort of funny statement about the environment, and I said to my editor, "Hey, I don't think Steve's very funny. Maybe I should write it. I'm pretty funny." And my editor said, "No, you're not." And then he said, "Well, I really want to do it. I don't enjoy the job I'm doing." He said, "Maybe you should quit." I said, "No, that's not what I'm saying." Um, and I became like a 2-year-old, just asking and asking and asking. Every day I'd come in and say, "Let me write that. Let me write the Daily Funny. Let me write the joke. Let me write it." And the more I asked, the more my editor said, "No, you can't do that." But I got very lucky. Steve went to a Baltimore Orioles baseball game, and well, he got hit by a foul ball in the face. And I mean, I felt terrible. I liked Steve a lot. He had to miss a few days of work, and so the next day at work, I said to my editor, "Steve, after a while, maybe it's my time. Maybe I should write the Daily Funny." And my editor said, "Okay, but be careful." So he gave me a story to make a funny statement about, and it was these poachers were in the Pacific Northwest, and they were as Pacific salmon were going upstream and jumping up the waterfalls. These poachers were netting them. They were an endangered species at the time, and squeezing all the oil out of them and sending the pills to Japan, where pregnant women were taking them because apparently the oil was good for their skin. And I sat with this article and thought, geez, I'm a writer. What can I do with this? How can I make this interesting? It's a weird story, but it's not funny. So finally, I sort of just broke down and said, well, I'm going to say that the women in Japan took the pills and blacked out, and then drove to shopping malls on escalators in the wrong direction, like trout going upstream. And I thought that's pretty good. And the story got shot out via email all over the country. And I was happy for about 20 minutes because I started hearing my editor's phone ring, and eventually I heard him say, "Well, he wrote it, so it must be true." And I started thinking, "Yeah, geez, is he talking about me?" And then he walked into the nested cubes where I worked, and he said, "Herbach, come with me." And I followed him out to his office, and he was just sweating bullets. And he said, "Is it true? Is it true? Do women in Japan take these pills and drive to shopping malls and go up escalators in the wrong direction?" And I said, "No. That's the joke part. That's the funny part. It's pretty funny, right?" And he said, "Oh, do you know what journalism is?" And I said, "Writing?" And he said, "No, the truth. You have to tell the truth." And I said, "Oh, right." And he said, "Yes, right. You're fired." And it was, just like that. He gave me a little box, and I had like Star Wars action figures at my desk, a little cactus. I had to put them in a box and just leave. So it was sad. But as I was going out, he actually said to me, "You seem to want to make stuff up. Why don't you write a book?" And I had my dad's voice in my head saying, "You will disappear in Canada." And I was scared, but that was sort of like the turning point for me. I tried to do a lot of other stuff. I didn't make enough money at Bernie's Rock Shop. I tried to be a journalist, and it turned me into a liar. So I thought maybe I should try to be a fiction writer. But it took me years and years and years to write my first book, which wasn't a young adult book. It was a book called The Miracle Letters of T. Herbach. When that thing came out, I actually went to my dad, and I said to him, "Hey, Dad, I wrote a book." And he said, "I know. I'm so proud of you." And I said, "That's great. I wrote this book, and where am I?" And he said, "You're in my living room." And I said, that is correct. Where is your living room?" And he said, "In my house." And I said, "Yeah, where's your house?" And he got this look on his face like, "Oh, what are you getting at?" And I said, "Well, I'm not in Canada, am I?" And he said, "Why would you be in Canada?" And I said, "Because you told me that if I became a writer, I would disappear into Canada." And he said, "No, I never said that." But he did. He told me that I would disappear into Canada. And so I do a lot of visits in schools, especially. And so one of the things that I always say to kids is, if you have a dream, if you love to do something so much and you do it all the time without anyone looking, if it's like your whole life, if you spend all the time doing it, like I spent my time at the public library in Platteville during the summers, and there's some sort of economic activity associated with it, which there clearly is with writing. I'm a professor of writing along with publishing books. Before you give up the dream, take a step back and think, is there any possibility I might make a living doing this in some way, shape, or form? And if your dream is to punch sharks in the face, your parents might tell you that's a terrible idea, and they might be right, and so don't do it. But if there is any sort of economic activity associated with what you love, please consider it before giving it up, because it took me sort of years to get back on track. And during that time, I started really writing dirty jokes. That's what had become of me in the time where I wasn't writing a lot in publishing. And in fact, by the time that book came out, a group of friends and I had started performing those jokes, and we did it first in a theater in Minneapolis, and then a bigger theater in Minneapolis, and finally we'd been asked to perform the show in New York. And I did have this thing like, you know, what I love is books, but man, I can sit around for an hour with a group of friends and write stupid stuff like I would have written when I was in 5th grade, real dumb jokes, and somebody's going to pay me money for it. That's probably a better path. So I started going back and forth between Minneapolis and New York City, doing comedy, and it was great. It was fun, except I'm from Platteville, and I know there are lots of people who I grew up with who now live in big cities. It is not for me. I live in St. Peter, Minnesota now, which is very similar to Platteville. It's on a bluff. It's got about 10,000 people in college. That's where I'm comfortable. I didn't enjoy being in New York. And worst of all, I had kids, and my kids by this time were in middle school. The oldest one was in 6th grade, and my daughter was in 4th grade. So I'd go out there every month, and sometimes stay for 3 weeks. Sometimes I'd go for longer. In any good story, I think there's a critical figure, a spirit guide. Like, I know many of you have seen the movie Ratatouille. It's the ghost chef there. It's, you know, in the first Star Wars, of course, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi, somebody who keeps the main character kind of on track. And if I think of my life as a big book and I'm the main character in it, there's a guy, I'm not going to actually name him. I would name him in any other state but Wisconsin, but he is a superintendent now at a Wisconsin school district, and I don't want anybody to know his dark secrets, but I'm going to tell you a couple. When I was in 7th grade, I was a tiny little bouncy kid, you know, and I was nerdy as can be. I read fantasy novels, you know the type. I read fantasy novels all the time. I could not sit still. I had a weird sound in my head all the time. It sounded kind of like, ah. A teacher could talk and I'd just hear that weird, like, ah, and sit there and bounce up and down until I could get my hands on a book again. Marty, oh, I said his name, forget that. This kid who sat next to me in a biology class, he was about 5'11", 180 pounds in 7th grade. He was huge. And at one point while I was bouncing up and down, he leaned over to me and said, "If you don't stop bouncing, I'm going to kill you." And those of you who work with kids know if you tell them to stop bouncing, those who are bouncy, they will start bouncing at double speed. And so I just like, okay, thanks, you know, thanks very much for telling me that. And it went on for months. I'd bounce, he'd lean over and say, "It's 2 o'clock. At 2:05, when the bell rings, you're going to die. Do you understand?" And I'd say, "Oh, okay, thanks for letting me know." And I'd watch the clock tick, tick, tick. And when the bell rang, I would jump out of my desk and I would run out of there as fast as I possibly could. And I ran and ran and ran and ran, and he could not catch me. He could not catch me. But I was filled with anxiety as well. I'd wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, today's the day I'm gonna die. Marty's gonna kill me. And one day, this was the 1980s, he almost did. I was walking around the corner of the gym and he was walking up the hallway, and I turned and there he was right in front of me. And instead of turning and running, I just froze. And he looked at me and just said, bam, and punched me in the nose. And I fell over backwards, started bleeding all over the place. And then he leaned over me and grabbed me by my shirt and pulled me up to standing, where I thought he was going to, you know, strangle me or something. And he just said, "You're pretty fast." And he walked away. And I'd just been physically assaulted, but all I could think is, I'm pretty fast. I'm pretty fast. I must be pretty fast. You know, I went home that day and I had blood all over my shirt. And my mom looked at me, she's like, what happened to you? And I said, "Oh, Marty thinks I'm pretty fast," instead of, you know, he tried to murder me. I've said his name many times. I need you to forget it. I started playing sports because of that, and I went out for track. It turned out I was about the fastest kid in my grade, one of the fastest kids in my conference down there in southwestern Wisconsin. And slowly, Marty and I became best friends. He was still terrible. He was an awful human being who scared people and bullied them. On one occasion, I saw him just punch a kid out, and it scared me a little bit, except for the fact I was this super nerdy kid who was just diffuse and all over the place. And Marty protected me, which I loved. It was great. So I'm gonna just talk quickly about the movie The Breakfast Club. It's not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination. There's some real awful things in it. It's not a movie that I would just show to my children necessarily and say, hey, you know, this is great. But it came out when I was in high school, and there is a nice message that is in there, and that is that people who are different should get along. Marty and I went to that when I was a junior in high school. And there's that iconic scene at the end where the criminal John Bender pumps his fist and walks out under the football uprights. And I looked over at my best friend, and tears were just shooting out of his eyes. He was just crying so hard. And I said, what happened? And Marty said, it's got to stop. It's got to stop. And I said, what's got to stop? And he said, it's got to stop. I drove him home, and this was in Dubuque, Iowa. So I drove him to Platteville. It was about a 25-minute drive, half-hour drive. He kind of cried the whole way. The next week at school, there was a punk rock kid getting beat up by a tight end on our football team. And Marty and I were walking down the hall, and Marty stopped and looked at me, and then looked over at the kid, and I thought, oh, Marty's gonna bully that kid too. But what happened is Marty walked over there and pulled them apart and kind of grabbed the tight end by his shirt and said, "Not in my school." And you know, of course, the tight end's like, "Well, I'm doing what you do." And Marty said, "No, no." And he's a big dude at this point. Always was a big dude, but like a very large man already at this point. And what he started doing was protecting all the kids. And you know, my mother actually gave him a ton of books to read, and he ended up becoming a high school English teacher, then a middle school principal, and as I said, a superintendent of a school district. I visited him while I was essentially a dirty joke writer when he was a principal of a middle school. I went in to talk about writing at his school, and as we were going in the building, this big bear of a man was hugging kids and saying, "We're gonna have a great day today. We're gonna have a great day." You know, and I thought back about who he was, and I just had this like just incredible, intense feeling of pride about what he'd become. And then I thought, I leave my kids behind for months at a time, and I write dirty jokes. I'm a bad person. I think I'm a bad person. You know, so the last time I went out to New York to write comedy and write dumb jokes, my son was at the end of 6th grade, and he was the kind of fantasy reader that I was. I mean, just these kids are insane, and I still see them all the time when I visit schools. You know, he would get a book from the school librarian, and he would read it as soon as he got home into dinner. And at dinner, I would say to him, "Oh, put down the book, Leo, put down the book." And he'd say, "Okay," and he'd put it on his lap and then put his head on the table so that he could read through dinner. And it kind of drove me crazy. In retrospect, I should have just let him read. He read and read and read. The last time I went to New York, I had to go for about 3.5 months, 4 months. It was for the summer, and so it was the summer between his 6th and 7th grade year. And I called him every day on the phone, and I talked to my kids. And you know, one day he answered the phone and he said, "Hi, Dad. How are you?" And I said, I'm good. How are you? He said, I'm great. Then he listed off the books that he was reading. 2 days later, I called him up and he said, Hi, Dad. Hi, Dad. And I said, Leo, are you okay? And he said, I don't know. I thought maybe he had a cold. 2 days after that, he answered the phone and sounded like this. Hello, Dad. I am a man. The bottom had just dropped out of his voice. And then he started sending me pictures of his pants because he was growing so fast. He said, these pants fit me a day ago. Now they're an inch too short. And I thought, wow, I'm a terrible person, and I'm missing my child grow up. And so I quit that comedy show, and at the end of the summer I came home, and my son had become a completely different human being. I also took him to the Nokomis branch of the public library there in Minneapolis about a day later, and he was, instead of being this little "Hi, Dad," he was this sort of like lanky teen-looking boy. And we walked into the library, and he sat down and started playing with his iPod. This was before all kids had cell phones, but he'd play games on his iPod. I should never have gotten him back. And I said to him, what are you doing? And he said to me one of the weirdest things I've ever heard in my life: books don't apply to me. And I said, books don't apply? Books are everything. Books are everything. They're everything. How can they not apply to you? And he's like, nah, man, books don't apply to me. And I was seriously concerned, because I knew how much books had informed who I was as a human being, and my mother and my father, who was a professor too. I mean, books were everything. 2 weeks later, I became a YA writer this way. I was sitting downstairs reading the Star Tribune newspaper, and I heard Leo wake up very late in the morning on a Saturday, and he was early in 7th grade, and he came walking down the stairs like, "Bah," as teenagers do. And he walked out into the living room and looked at me and went, "Dad, do you smell something?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "What is it?" And I said, "I don't know." And so we did that thing that you do when there's a bad smell in your house. And I started smelling through the living room, like sniffing. And Leo sniffed through the kitchen, and we did this kind of figure eight. And as he passed me by, I went, and I said, "Leo, it's you." And he said, "What?" And he lifted up his left arm. He said, "Oh, oh." And then he lifted up his right arm and he said, "That one's fine." Then he lifted up his left arm and I said, "Oh." And I said, "Oh, well, it looks like you got hit by the puberty train on your left side last night." And he said, what do I do? What do I do? And I said, well, let's go to Target and get you some deodorant. So it was a beautiful father-son moment. We drove to Target, and he kept lifting his arm up and down and going, "Oh, hey, this one's fine." And so when we got to Target, a guy with a red shirt came up and said, "Hey, can I help you find something?" And I said, "Oh, well, my son's left armpit went through puberty last night. Um, can you help us find some deodorant?" And Leo was like, "Shut up there. Shut up." And I thought it was so funny that on the way home, I thought, I'm just going to write a story about a kid who grows really fast. And I wrote about 500 words that day, and I could see that the kid was had a little brother and had a mother, and that the father was gone for some reason, and that the kid loved sports, loved football. And then I thought about my best friend growing up, Marty, and how he started protecting everybody. I thought, oh, I want to write him into that. And suddenly, kind of Platteville grew up in the book, and that book ended up being Stupid Fast, which I gave to my son as soon as I ripped the first draft, and he read it on his iPod, and that really has changed my life, and the last book that I wrote, of course, Cracking the Bell, is in some ways the connected to that first book, because I loved football growing up and adored what it did to my life, and yet I had easily 3 concussions, even though it organized my life and gave me a giant set of friends and was a beautiful thing to me. But I wanted to wrestle with that and wrestle with it from the perspective of a kid. So I write books primarily for kids who don't want to read, which means I depend entirely on librarians to get them. I don't write books for kids who show up in bookstores or who go read blogs about books or who go to search things out on Amazon. It is librarians who have given me this career that I love so much. So thank you. I appreciate what you do completely, and I would not be me without you, and my family would not be my family without you, and my community would not be my community without you. So thank you so much. And I'd be happy to take a few questions if there are any. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure not seeing you sitting out here in Minnesota instead of being in Wisconsin, where I really wanted to be right now. But thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? And also, thank you so much, Geoff. You are definitely welcome to come next year. You should come
Okay,
to the WLA conference next year.
I would appreciate that.
Also, Hannah, I can't see what's happening on the other chat. I don't know if there are any questions there.
While we're waiting for questions, I did want to say, Geoff, that I think GoToMeeting kept getting annoyed with me because I kept laughing while I was on mute, and it just kept popping up, "You're on mute, you're on mute, you're on mute." And I'm sure that our other attendees were having a similar issue. Thank you so much for sharing all of those wonderful stories with us.
Yes, my pleasure.
Yes, thank you. This is Catherine, and mine definitely did the same thing. It just kept yelling at me, being like, "You're on mute. No one can hear you." I'm like, "That's fine. That's probably better because no one would be able to hear Geoff." They heard me laughing the whole time. So, yes, thank you so much for joining us. It was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us as well. If you haven't read Cracking the Bell or Hooper or any of other of Geoff's works, you should do it. They're so good. They're so good. All right.
All right.
Thank you so
Good.
much.
Thank you. Well, bye.
Bye-bye.